America has been running the greatest financial fraud in human history for over a century through systematic monetary manipulation. The United States has transferred trillions from every other nation directly into American hands, and most of the world still doesn't understand how. The mechanism is elegant. America prints paper dollars. Other countries accept them for real goods and services. Then America prints more dollars to devalue the ones already circulating globally. It's the largest theft operation ever conducted, disguised as monetary policy. Since 1971, the Federal Reserve created over $30 trillion from nothing money that purchased oil from Saudi Arabia, manufacturing from China, technology from Europe. All for paper promises America can create infinitely at zero cost. Every iPhone, every barrel of oil, every German car bought with dollars represents real labor and resources exchanged for digital entries in computer systems. The scale of this wealth transfer is staggering. America consumes $800 billion more than it produces annually, funding the difference through currency creation that forces other nations to subsidize American consumption. Chinese factory workers, Saudi oil engineers, and German automotive technicians work to produce goods that Americans purchase with money created from nothing. But the system is failing. BRICS nations representing 40% of global population are building alternatives. China and Russia now conduct 30% of their trade in national currencies. Saudi Arabia accepts yuan for oil sales. Central banks worldwide are accumulating gold at the fastest pace since 1950, preparing for post-dollar monetary arrangements. When it collapses and mathematical reality guarantees it will, America faces hyperinflation and the end of the exorbitant privilege that funded decades of deficit spending beyond what the economy actually produces. The transition will be swift, brutal, and irreversible, transforming America from global financial hegemon to isolated debtor nation within a decade. The original American monetary sin, the Federal Reserve Conspiracy 1913. The United States Constitution grants Congress the power to coin money and regulate the value thereof. For over 120 years, America operated without a central bank, with currency backed by gold and silver. But in 1913, a small group of bankers executed a financial coup that transferred monetary control from the American people to private financial interests. The Jekyll Island plot in November 1910. 6 men representing America's most powerful banks met secretly on Jekyll Island, Georgia, to design a central banking system. The attendees represented an enormous concentration of financial power. Senator Nelson Aldrich, grandfather of Nelson Rockefeller and father-in-law to John D. Rockefeller Jr. Assistant Treasury Secretary A. Pierre Tendreau, Frank Vanderlip of National Bank, representing Rockefeller interests. Henry Davison of J.P. Morgan Company, Charles Norton of First National Bank, and Paul Warburg representing European Rothschild banking interests. The meeting was conducted in absolute secrecy under false names. The conspirators traveled separately, used hunting expedition as cover, and met at the Jekyll Island Club, a private retreat for America's wealthiest families, where servants were sworn to secrecy and public access was prohibited. These men controlled approximately 25% of America's wealth and understood that public knowledge of banker involvement in monetary system design would trigger massive political opposition. Previous attempts at central banking had failed precisely because Americans recognized central banks as tools for private profit at public expense. Fornendais. They crafted legislation appearing to create government-controlled banking while establishing banker control over money creation, interest rates, and credit allocation. The plan was brilliant political theater, creating the appearance of government oversight. while ensuring private banker control over the nation's monetary system. The Federal Reserve Act deception. The Jekyll Island conspirators faced the challenge of overcoming deep American opposition to central banking. The first bank of the United States 1791 to 1811 and second bank of the United States 1816 to 1836 had been destroyed by populist opposition led by Thomas Jefferson and Andrew Jackson, who understood central banks as mechanisms for wealthy elites to exploit ordinary citizens through monetary manipulation. The solution was sophisticated marketing, deception, and political timing. Instead of calling it a central bank which would trigger immediate opposition, they called it a Federal Reserve System, implying government control and decentralized operation. Instead of one institution that could be easily identified and opposed, they created 12 regional banks appearing to represent different geographic interests rather than unified banker control. The legislation was deliberately complex and technical, making it difficult for representatives to understand its actual provisions. The bill was 1,200 pages long, filled with banking jargon that obscured its true purpose and effects. Most members of Congress never read the full bill and relied on assurances from banking committee members who were aligned with the Jekyll Island conspirators. The political timing was crucial. The act passed Congress on December 23, 1913, when many representatives had left Washington for Christmas recess. The vote was rushed through with minimal debate, and President Wilson signed it immediately, later confessing, "I have unwittingly ruined my country. A great industrial nation is controlled by its system of credit." The success of this political manipulation established the template for future banker-government cooperation. Complex legislation passed quickly during distracted periods, with true purpose hidden behind technical language and public relations campaigns emphasizing benefits while concealing costs. The private control mechanism, despite its name, the Federal Reserve, is not federal and has no reserves. It's a private banking cartel with government blessing. Regional Federal Reserve banks are owned by member banks, which elect their directors. The most important bank, the New York Fed, is controlled by Wall Street's largest institutions. The Fed's profits generated by creating money from nothing are distributed to member banks after covering expenses. In 2022, the Fed distributed over $76 billion to member banks as dividends. FDR's gold robbery, stealing from American citizens. 1,933 1,934. The Great Depression provided President Franklin Roosevelt with the crisis necessary to complete the Federal Reserve's control over American money by eliminating gold ownership among citizens and manipulating gold prices for government benefit. Executive Order 6102, the gold confiscation. On April 5, 1933, Roosevelt made it illegal for Americans to own gold, requiring citizens to sell their gold to the government at $20.67 per ounce or face 10 years in federal prison and $10,000 fines equivalent to $200,000 today. The order was presented as an emergency measure to combat gold hoarding that was supposedly undermining economic recovery efforts. The confiscation was comprehensive and ruthlessly enforced. Americans were required to surrender gold coins, gold bullion, and gold certificates, keeping only small amounts for industrial use or numismatic collections. Banks were instructed to report customers with large gold holdings. Safe deposit boxes were searched. The Treasury Department created a network of informants to identify citizens who might be hiding gold. Most Americans complied with the confiscation order, surrendering approximately 500 tons of family gold accumulated over generations. The psychological impact was devastating. Citizens who had saved gold as protection against currency debasement were forced to exchange it for the very paper money they distrusted, under threat of imprisonment by their own government. The enforcement included high-profile prosecutions to intimidate potential resistors. Frederick Barber Campbell, a San Francisco attorney, was prosecuted for owning gold coins worth $200. Leo Cohn, a New York dealer, was arrested for having $900 in gold. These cases were publicized to demonstrate that even small violations would result in federal prosecution. After confiscating citizen gold, Roosevelt revalued it 69% upward to $35 per ounce through the 1930 for Gold Reserve Act. This created massive government profits while imposing losses on citizens who had surrendered their gold. Americans were forced to sell at $20.67 and prohibited from buying back at $35 for the next 41 years, until Gerald Ford legalized gold ownership in 1975. The revaluation enabled massive monetary expansion, as the same amount of gold could now back 69% more currency creation. The Federal Reserve expanded the money supply dramatically throughout the 1930s, funding New Deal programs through inflation that reduced the real wages of workers while benefiting debtors, including the government itself. The constitutional violation. The gold confiscation violated the Fifth Amendment prohibition against taking private property without just compensation. Citizens received $20.67 per ounce for gold that the government immediately valued at $35 per ounce, representing a $1 confiscation face value. The Supreme Court upheld the confiscation in the 1935 Gold Clause cases, ruling that monetary policy gave the government unlimited authority over currency and contracts. The decision established precedent that the government could manipulate money and contracts at will without constitutional restriction. This ruling eliminated constitutional protection for monetary property and contracts, enabling the unlimited monetary manipulation that would follow over the next 90 years. Bretton Woods, forcing the world onto the dollar standard 1.9 for 4. World War II provided the United States with the opportunity to establish global monetary dominance through the Bretton Woods system, which forced other nations to use dollars for international trade while maintaining the illusion of gold backing. The Bretton Woods Conference manipulation. In July 1944, representatives from 44 nations met at Bretton Woods to establish a new international monetary system. The United States, possessing most of the world's gold after European wartime destruction, dictated terms to desperate allies. The system required all nations to fix their currencies to the dollar at specific exchange rates. Only the United States could devalue unilaterally. Other nations had to purchase dollars to maintain fixed rates, creating automatic demand for American currency. The dollar-gold convertibility lie Bretton Woods promised dollars were as good as gold because the U.S. pledged to convert dollars to gold at $35 per ounce for foreign governments. But the convertibility was always fraudulent. The U.S. held approximately 20,000 tons of gold while issuing dollars far exceeding gold backing. Foreign governments accepted dollars based on conversion promises the United States never intended to honor fully. The system created time delayed between dollar issuance and potential gold demands, enabling wealth extraction through currency creation. The exorbitant privilege begins. Bretton Woods created what French President Charles de Gaulle called d'América's exorbitant privilege, the unique ability to purchase foreign goods and assets with currency the United States created at zero cost. Other nations had to earn dollars through trade, surpluses, or gold sales. The United States could simply print dollars and exchange them for oil, manufactured goods, raw materials, and foreign assets. This asymmetry enabled systematic wealth transfer from the world to America. Between 1944 and 1971, the United States accumulated trillions of dollars in real wealth by exchanging paper promises for tangible goods and services that required real labor and resources to produce. The Nixon shock, breaking the last link to real money. By 1971, the Bretton Woods system had become mathematically impossible. Foreign governments held more dollars than the US had gold to redeem, forcing Nixon to choose between maintaining the system or abandoning gold convertibility. French President Charles de Gaulle initiated a strategy to force gold convertibility. Beginning in 1965, other nations followed. By 1971, foreign governments held over $80 billion, while the US possessed only $10 billion in gold at official prices. On August 15, 1971, Nixon announced the US would temporarily suspend gold convertibility. The temporary suspension became permanent. The world was forced onto pure fiat currency with the dollar as reserve currency, enabling unlimited dollar creation without gold constraint. The petrodollar system, weaponizing oil demand 1973 to 1979 after destroying gold backing. The US needed new mechanism to force global dollar demand. The solution was linking oil trade to dollar usage, creating artificial demand through energy necessity that would prove even more effective than gold convertibility promises. The opportunity arose from the 1973 Arab oil embargo, which quadrupled oil prices and created chaos in international energy markets. Rather than viewing this as a crisis, Henry Kissinger recognized it as an opportunity to establish permanent dollar dominance through energy dependency. In 1974, Kissinger negotiated a secret agreement with Saudi Arabia that became the foundation of the petrodollar system. The United States would provide military protection, advanced weapons, and security guarantees for the Saudi royal family in exchange for ironclad guarantees that Saudi Arabia would price all oil, sales in dollars, and recycle oil revenues through American financial markets. The agreement was formalized through a series of classified protocols that established the United States-Saudi Arabian Joint Commission on Economic Cooperation. Saudi Arabia committed to purchasing U.S. Treasury bonds with oil revenues, depositing surplus funds in American banks, and contracting with American companies for infrastructure development. In return, the U.S. provided F-15 fighter jets, a WACS surveillance aircraft, and a comprehensive security umbrella protecting Saudi Arabia from regional threats. The Saudi Agreement established the template for global petrodollar recycling. Oil-producing nations would accept only dollars for oil sales. Then, invest those dollars in American Treasury bonds, bank deposits, and financial assets. This created automatic, circular flow where oil revenue returned to the United States as capital investment, enabling continued deficit spending without inflationary consequences. Other major oil producers were systematically forced to follow the Saudi example through a combination of economic incentives and military pressure. Countries that cooperated received American military protection and access to advanced weapons systems. Countries that resisted faced economic warfare, political destabilization, and potential military intervention to ensure compliance with dollar-denominated oil pricing. The system requires continuous military enforcement to prevent oil producers from accepting alternative currencies. Iraq's Saddam Hussein announced in 2000 that Iraq would accept euros for oil sales, threatening the petrodollar foundation. The United States invaded Iraq in 2003, eliminating the threat and sending a clear message to other potential defectors. Libya's Muammar Gaddafi proposed a gold-backed African currency for oil trade in 2010. NATO destroyed Libya in 2011, preventing the establishment of any gold-based alternative to dollar oil pricing. Quantitative easing, the final stage of dollar debasement, 2008 present. The 2008 financial crisis provided justification for unlimited money creation disguised as quantitative easing. Since 2008, the Federal Reserve created over $15 trillion through QE programs purchasing government bonds and corporate debt with newly created money. Tire pressant 500% money supply increase in 15 years. Key follows the Cantillon effect. Newly created money benefits those receiving it first while imposing costs on those receiving it last. Banks and financial institutions receive new money first and purchase assets before prices rise. Middle-class savers receive it last, after asset prices increased and consumer prices begin rising. The BRICS challenge, the beginning of the end. The dollar system faces its first serious challenge as BRICS nations representing 40% of global population build alternative payment systems. China and Russia developed bilateral payment systems eliminating dollar involvement in mutual trade. The BRICS nations are expanding these systems to include Brazil, India, South Africa, and new members like Saudi Arabia and UAE by 2024. Over 30% of China-Russia trade occurs in national currencies rather than dollars. Saudi Arabia began accepting yuan for oil sales to China. BRICS central banks are accumulating gold at unprecedented rates while reducing dollar holdings, signaling preparation for post-dollar monetary arrangements. The mathematical reality why the system must collapse. The dollar system contains mathematical contradictions guaranteeing eventual collapse, regardless of political or military efforts to maintain it. The Triffin dilemma. For the dollar to serve as global reserve currency, the US must run persistent trade deficits to supply dollars to the world. But persistent deficits eventually undermine confidence in the currency. American government debt grows exponentially through compound interest, while economic output grows linearly. Current debt of $30 trillion requires $1.5 trillion annual interest payments. Mathematical modeling indicates debt becomes unserviceable within 15 to 20 years regardless of policy changes. Historical analysis reveals reserve currency transitions follow predictable patterns. Dominant currencies maintain hegemony for 80 to 100 years before replacement. The dollar achieved reserve status in 1944, suggesting transition period beginning around 2024 to 2044, the coming collapse, timeline, and consequences. Based on current de-dollarization trends, debt mathematics, and international monetary competition, the dollar system faces collapse within the next decade. BRICS expansion will accelerate. Alternative payment systems will achieve scale for major transactions. And government debt service will consume over 40% of federal revenue, forcing massive money creation. The Federal Reserve will face impossible choices between defending the currency through interest rate increases triggering economic collapse, or allowing currency collapse through continued money creation. When major trading nations announce transition away from dollar reserves, panic selling will trigger capital flight from American markets. For 250 years, America used increasingly sophisticated monetary manipulation to extract wealth from other nations while consuming beyond productive capacity. The mathematics of compound interest and exponential debt growth guarantee the extraction system must eventually collapse, forcing America to discover that monetary manipulation cannot substitute for genuine productivity and fiscal responsibility.